Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Agency meeting for today, the 23rd. All right. Okay. Call to order. Pledge of Allegiance, please. John, if you would lead us, please. Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes, here.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director Zaragoza?
Here.
Director Clark?
Here.
Director Borchers?
Here. Okay, Sam McIntyre is in the audience, Dave Schwabauer is in the audience, and I don't see any other alternates. We have two alternates in the audience. Agenda review, what do you got?
Chair Mulhart, only one thing. We would suggest or recommend that you move informational item number 5 down below action item number 8. I think some of the stuff that will be covered in number 8 might help you in your direction to us on item 5.
Okay, so we're going to move, you want it before, or where do you want it?
After action item number 8.
Okay, all right, so we'll do that. We'll move 5 following number 8. Okay, any other changes or recommendations? Okay, any objection?
I agree with it.
Okay, hearing none, so ordered. Let's go deal with public comments, an opportunity for the public to address the board on non-agenda items. Yes, sir.
Once again, it's Steve Nash standing at the podium, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak, Chairman and board directors and staff. And I'm sure this will cause some people to spin, but based on what I've witnessed in these chambers here in this room, I'm just about alone in my concern for the sustainability of the groundwater basins. Everyone else has a dog in the fight, whether it's job security, a desire for more water, a desire for cheap water, a desire for votes, and currying favor with the extractors, be they growers or M&I. Everyone here has an agenda seemingly at odds with the two mandates of this agency, arriving at a sustainable yield and reversing seawater intrusion into the aquifer. All the reports, all the user groups, the smoke and mirrors of irrigation efficiency indices might delay the eventual adjudication of the water basins, but it cannot prevent it. That's one judge, one water master, and a minimal support staff, and AMRs for everyone. The State Water Resources Control Board, Mr. Howard, and the Groundwater Protection section would find it fascinating that really you don't even know the actual extraction total due to errors and omissions and substantial non-reporting in your semi-annual extraction statements. And also, if you could please remember to call for public comments during each agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rob?
Rob Saperstein for City of Oxnard. Two unrelated items, oddly enough. I restate what Mr. Nash said in a perhaps more positive way. And it's triggered a little bit by the letter that the City of Oxnard received from the county in response to its urban water management plan. We continue to get hyperbole about reliability of credits and whether the GRAPE program is going to actually contribute or not contribute, or what it contributes to the basin. And what I'd ask the board to think about doing sooner than later is to develop some sort of workshop or come back to the issue of how do we deal with faction of the community's concern over reliability of the basin and get rid of some of the chatter over, are we going to adjudicate the basin? Do we have a plan to augment water supplies? Do we have a plan to better manage the existing supplies? Something needs to be done so we can stop the hyperbole and allow folks that need to plan on this supply to do responsible planning. So that's piece number one. And frustration is we get kind of agenda after agenda, and I really don't mean this as a slight to this board or to agency staff, but it feels to me as though we've gone through a year of agenda items of we're going to deal with credits, not going to deal with credits. We get rid of the issue. It's kind of like gum on our shoes, keeps on coming back in some odd ways. And in the meantime, the agendas are kind of filled with stuff that doesn't feel of substance. So I'd like to focus everybody's attention on getting to some place where the community feels like we are responsibly managing the resource. Point number one. Number two, totally unrelated, has somewhat to do with a consent item, and so I don't know if there was going to be room for public comment. And it's also related to the city's appeal on extinguishment of the zombie credits, vampire credits. I forget what we're calling the bulk of credits for which no one claims responsibility or ownership. The city's had some ongoing discussion with staff. We're not worried about having the city's issue taken care of, but I just mentioned the same concern because it's part of the city's appeal. GMA board adopted an ordinance in early December 2011, issued notices that were supposed to be triggered by the process adopted in that ordinance in late December before the ordinance was even effective. So I asked the question the city asked in its appeal, how is the GMA taking action under an ordinance that wasn't yet effective?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's Peter Goldenring. I represent Linda Ortega, and I think each of you probably have received various of our correspondences. We've been trying to get agendized to deal with the issue involving Ms. Ortega's wells. You all have packets. I've asked staff, and I've been given the understanding from Mr. Bawada that each of you either have or should have the staff's of packages that we asked to be agendized concerning Ms. Ortega's wells. We have been dealing with staff on this since June of 2011. We're a year down the road. And when you look at your staff's letter concerning Ms. Ortega's wells, it was purposely copied to real estate brokers. So my client's land has been tied up in terms of sale or refinance or anything that we can do with it because of the decision of staff to issue that letter and do it in a way that notified the entire community of the matters contained in that. And we were given to understand that we could be agendized to get to the bottom of this for you to deal with this matter. And then I learned, as my most recent correspondence to each of you indicated, that the staff was unable or unwilling to agendize the matter. The second frustration we have, besides getting this dealt with and over, and setting aside the issue of claims that my client has because of this year-long process, is that we went through a process of obtaining all of the GMA internal records, including the transcripts. And in the original correspondence that I wrote to each of you folks that provided all of this information, including Dr. Preston's correspondence of June 25, 1996, specifying that the two wells were not subject to GMA jurisdiction. We gave you the transcription of the board decisions around this. And even with that information, we can't get staff to move or deal with it. So I'm asking that the matter be agendized today so that we can get the matter dealt with. And I'm asking that you please get this dealt with so that we can allow our client to move on forward one way or the other. I'm also asking that as a matter of record, for purposes of my purposes, if we're not able to get it solved, that the record of the proceedings today include the various correspondences that we've submitted, including that of September 14 and continuing, and the most recent correspondence that was sent to each of you on May 18, 2012 with the enclosures, that be made part of the official record today, so that for purposes of the administrative proceeding, there's a record that we have put this in front of you, that we've been attempting to deal with this with your staff for a year, and we've been unable to get any movement on this. So I'd ask, though it's, I understand, slightly out of the ordinary, that a motion be considered to place this on today's agenda so that we can have the matter dealt with. Because otherwise we're being left with no alternative but but a letter from a year ago from your staff to the community that our clients' wells are subject to GMA regulation and out of compliance and all the
Okay,
consequences
let
associated.
me stop, let me get some answers. Is it going to be on next month's agenda, as I understand it?
It is. We received this on, it looks like Thursday last week, after this agenda was already printed.
All right, so it's going to be on next month's agenda?
Yes.
All right. So it is on next month's agenda. That's answer your first question. Second question is, it's not agendized for today. I'm not comfortable going through some kind of process of putting it on today's agenda. We have it on next month's agenda. Okay? You okay with that?
Mr. Bellata told me this morning it wasn't, or that he didn't know, so that's why.
Okay, it's
I'm
on
here.
next month's agenda. That's what I'm hearing from staff. You okay with that?
Okay, I'm sorry, I pointed to because I thought you were going to ask a question, could it be agenda today, and I thought
Okay.
it was Brown Act violations.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah.
I was just going to share that. If how can we do it if it's not agendized?
Yeah, I don't, if it's on next month's agenda, we have a time certain, we'll deal with it next month. I don't want to go through some lengthy administrative process to come up with a reason why it has to be dealt with today. We're just not going to go down that road.
And for your board's information, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this issue. We have responded to them, it's just not the response that they would like. And so this would be a sort of appeal of our response, and we'll be following that sort of format.
Okay, well,
next month.
let's get it on the agenda, let's deal with the issue, and so we have the authority to either act on it or give direction to staff or some other methodology for next month. Yes, ma'am?
Whether staff is recommending we act or not, could I ask that it be put on as an action item and not as an information item? Because if it's an information item, if we wanted to, we couldn't take action.
Okay, so it's an action item, so you give it, do it in such a way that it gives us a broad range of actions that we can take, so we can see if we can get some closure to this issue. Okay?
And so that the record's clear, we are not conceding that this is an appeal by us at all. That's what Mr. Pratt keeps trying to do. As far as we're concerned, the determination was made, and we have put before the board the requests that we have for the action items, which include directing staff to retract the letter that's at issue. So we're not conceding Mr. Pratt's procedure because we have questions around that, because we think the board acted, and Dr. Preston followed the board's direction
Okay.
16
All right,
years ago.
I hear the message.
Next week.
Al, when staff writes the agenda item as an action item, I need you to review it and make your recommendation on how it should be written so that we have all the authority we need to do whatever we have to do to see if we can make a decision or whatever we have to do. Okay? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on, yes, ma'am?
Chairman Milhart, my name is Linda Ortega. I am here to just request that you hear and decide on this matter not necessarily right now, but Lowell Preston went through all of this 16 years ago with my geologists, my attorneys, my well driller. We have already fought this battle. Mr. Pratt seems to think that we are appealing the decision. It has never been set aside. I have already had a decision. I have now had to hire an attorney and start the same battle again that I fought 16 years ago with my husband, Anthony. And I request that this matter be put to an end. I am not afraid of a fight, and I know that there is a war chest, and I am more than willing to spend every nickel of it.
Okay. Again, this is a comment period. I can't respond to anything.
I realize
It's on the
that.
agenda.
But this decision has already been made 16 years ago, and I
Okay.
really don't need to be agendized. This needs to just be said, yes, Linda, you have already been
Okay,
decided.
ma'am, it's on the agenda for next month. The board cannot make comments on it. It's a public comment period. It's not an action item for us now. So
Okay.
the issues that you raise and the passion that you show, we'll deal with it next month. That's all I can do right now.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else have any public comments? Okay, we have, first of all, the consent items. And before I get into that, Rob, let me make sure, you want to comment on number 2? Is that what you want to do, or?
Rob Saperstein again for City of Oxnard. I didn't know if it was the board's normal course to take comment on consent items. I think the appropriate process would be take it off consent if you want to have
Okay.
a public comment. But my comment was only the consent item proposes to take action on something I believe is inappropriate for the board to take action on. It's already done it with respect to issues over which the city's already appealed, so I'm not worried about the city, but I'm trying to be protective of
Okay.
the board's
Let me-
time.
All right, let me ask a quick question. Al, if we take it off the consent so that they make comments, does it still give us the ability to take action on it, or does it become an information item? What category does it fall into?
Well, it's not an action item, so whether it's on the consent agenda or not is of no consequence. This is merely an additional notification that the board built into the ordinance code as it was revised in December to notify anyone who may have a concern about the extinguishment of those credits that this action was going to take place. So it's merely informational for anyone interested in those particular credits that are scheduled for being extinguished.
Okay. All right, so hold on a second, Rob. Let's do this. We can either take, in the past what we've done is we've gotten a motion for the consent items and we've just moved on. I'm willing to take a motion for the consent item of approval of minutes. If I can have a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second. A motion, a second. Any objection? Hearing none, so moved. All right, let's deal with item number 2 as a separate. Hold on, sir. Is there anything else you want to say on this before I go to somebody else in the audience? The way Al describes it, we're just giving out more notice. We're not doing anything.
And the way I would characterize it is it was built into the ordinance as a due process issue, not just, we're going to give information to the community. The purpose of our suggesting this amendment to the ordinance was to give those folks that might have an interest in this valuable property right proper due process so that they're given notice of the potential extinguishment of credits. And my point is the agency cannot take action according to an ordinance that's not yet effective. So they provided notice at the end of December for using a procedure in an ordinance that wasn't yet effective.
Al?
And I don't get it.
Al, what's the response? Give us some direction. I mean,
This is in addition to the notice that Rob is saying was premature. So it's two separate notices. So if he's correct that the written notice to the last registered operators was sent out too soon, that's separate and apart from the agendizing of this same notification. It's sort of what's referred to as a belt and suspenders approach. It's two separate notices. So if the first notice was defective, maybe that needs to be redone. But that would not require this to either be continued or redone.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Isn't this ordinance 8.5 in existence already? And we just, there's an intent to notify the folks that we're going to eliminate those credits?
It is correct.
So what?
I think his point is that the ordinance was adopted the 7th of December and it became effective the 6th of January, and sometime in December, before the ordinance became effective, they sent out notices that he says should have been sent out after January 6th.
Okay, let's do this. My recommendation would be, in the abundance of caution, let's table this item, do the review process. Let's make sure that we meet the time frame, put it back on the agenda for next month, and we'll deal with it then. It's a new item. We'll deal with it next month. Okay? Yeah. Just roll it over to next month, and let's see if we can sort this thing out internally.
Mr. Chairman, should we direct staff to notify by letter?
The first letter.
I think what you need to do is look at this timing issue that Rob has raised. Let's get this issue resolved, and if we have to do the process, you define for us how we solve Rob's concern and do the process. In the abundance of caution, let's just do it that way.
Is that
Okay?
a 30-day notice? Is that what?
Listen, I don't want to get into, you guys have to do the internal looking, take a review of what Rob has raised. He's raised an issue. In the abundance of caution, let's just roll it to next month and sort this thing out so we don't have this question mark in front of us, okay? Let's just do it that way.
Problem I have, about half of those people, I know them.
Okay.
Harry McKee's on there and a whole bunch of people.
Okay.
Need a motion?
Again,
No.
no, I'm just directing staff. We're not going to deal with it. We're just going to have to roll it to next month. I'd like to deal with it, but I think in abundance of caution, this is a better approach. You had a question, real quick.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, could you clarify with council if the public is allowed to comment on minutes before they get approved?
If you have some corrections to the minutes?
Yes, if I could. On page 3 of 10, 82 non-reporters, and just, this is to clarify my statements from last month. I did do an extrapolation solving for X.
Okay, wait. No, we're not going to do that. Okay, you have a comment on the minutes. I don't want to go into a different policy statements or.
Well, these are my comments.
I don't need if you have corrections to the minutes, then let's deal with corrections to the minutes. But I'm not going to go through the process of extrapolation, which becomes a whole nother debate on last month's issues, and I don't want to do that.
I don't see where it says Mr. Nash on page 3 of 10. Could you help us get to the right place?
Right. Well, based on 82 non-reporters, I came up with a figure of 143,750 acre feet, and I could go through the process, but that takes too much time. Based on the 236 non-reporting wells, I came up with a figure of 150,000.
Okay, stop. Mr. Nash, please. Mr. Nash.
Yes.
Please look at me. Listen. We run a very open meeting here, all right? And in the process of running an open meeting, I have to be fair to the constituents and I have to be fair to you. And I'm asking you, sir, if you have corrections to the minutes, I'll deal with those. And I apologize for not recognizing you when we had prior to that vote. But if we go from that to a policy statement or an additional statement, you're putting us in a position where we're now debating things that are not on our agenda, and I'm not going to do that.
Mr. Chair.
Just a second. If, in fact, these are issues that you want to raise, then we need to get it back on the agenda at some future point, but I don't want to deal with interpretations and extrapolations that you've come up with because it's not part of the minutes.
These are simply things that I stated last month, and they were not included in the minutes.
Mr. Chair, here's where I think he's
my issue.
disputing the minutes. It's on page 4, I believe. Toward the bottom, it says, Mr. Steve Nash, Oxnard resident, expressed his concern regarding the results of the statement filings, the errors reported, and provided his own calculations of extractions. Now, is that the statement you're talking about?
Right.
And he would like it to get specific, but these are not detailed minutes.
That's correct.
So we don't get that detailed in our minutes, or they go
for hours on end. We have
pages.
tapes of the meetings.
Okay, if I could just bring out one further point. On 2C, page 4 or 5, if you look at the total of 75,308.8 acre feet, it does not match the total from item 2A, page 2 of 2, which is 68,060 acre feet, and I'm just curious as to why there's a discrepancy. Thank you.
Okay.
We have approved the minutes, but at the last meeting, Mr. Nash did ask us if we could ask for comments on the consent calendar. Maybe what we need to do is just at some point, and it probably would have to be agendized to do this, but establish a time when that would be. And I think since it's before the consent calendar, the time to do that might be at public comments time. But I don't know. We'll have to talk about that and bring it up. We can't make that decision today.
Well, I think we have two issues going on here. First of all, historically, our minutes have been generalized minutes to give a broad understanding of things we talked about. We also record it on tape. We also have it on film, because it's, so we have, in fact, a record. There is a point where we have actual detailed records of it. And if, in fact, we have to have a comment period on the minutes prior to it, then I need to add that, or whoever's acting as chair at the time needs to add that prior to the approval of minutes, and I apologize for that oversight.
Chair, if I might, in my opinion, that it's like what was stated. These minutes are a generalized presentation of proceedings of the meeting. They're not a play-by-play, statement-by-statement, actualized quotation of everything that was said. That would be impossible. If a member of the public did have a comment about the way something was presented in the minutes, then I think the opportune time for that is during the public comment period. I don't think we need to establish another comment period for the minutes as well. There have been times when the board has made statements that maybe were perhaps corrections of things that seem to be putting things in a different light. But I think we need to be careful about having meetings that just go on well into the evening and we don't get a lot done.
Okay. What I would ask then is, Al, give us, prior to next meeting, some guidance on how we're going to allow, or should allow, some corrections to the minutes and what the policy should be, given the fact that we have a generalized minutes, but we have specific recording and tape, videotape and audio tape of the minutes. So there is, in fact, a permanent record of what goes on in the minutes. In fact, I think it's broadcast throughout this building. So give us some direction on that. And we've heard Mr. Nash's comments, and I've noted in the minutes Mr. Nash elected to try to make some, or made some comments on the March meeting minutes. I would assume that he'll have comments on future minutes, and we have to have some protocol to be able to handle that. And so let's figure out that solution, okay? All right. Let's move on to information items number 3, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. For the record, my name is Rick Birgutz. I'll be presenting item number 3 today, the fiscal year 2011-12 third quarter work plan update. I'm just going to provide you a verbal update. I don't have PowerPoint slides for it, and I'm just going to hit some of the high notes. If you have questions, we can go into those. But some of the key issues that we did during the third quarter is, of course, as usual, we enter in the semi-annual extraction statement, but during the third quarter, we took extra effort during the third quarter to quantify errors and omissions. So that's a notable thing. We hadn't done that before, and so that's a notable thing that we did during the third quarter. We updated your board on that in April. The agency software is up and running. We're getting very good support from IT services. On CR 6, which is the next page, the extraction allocation and surcharge system administration. No allocation transfers, but there is something on the radar. I'm not sure if Peter Goldenring mentioned it, but he's been talking with us about an additional allocation transfer from Grimes Rock to State Ready Mix. And we're just waiting on additional information from him. So just wanted that to be on your radar. On CT1, as you know, there was more work done on the credit extinguishment issues. CT4, we're moving forward with training videos, purchasing a weather station. On 5, Kathleen provided an update on the meter calibration to your board, and your board adopted the ordinance. Actually, that was in April. I'm sorry. We haven't received invoices for the groundwater resource management grant. We've dealt with a number of enforcement issues, and the Los Posas Basin planning is continuing. So that's my verbal update.
Okay. Any questions? Any specific questions? Anybody in the audience? Specific questions? Okay. Let's go to item number 4. Oh, we have to receive and file.
Move to receive and file.
Motion a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Number 4, please.
Chair Mulhart, board members, members of the public, Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District, and in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to the chase, which is really looking at our revenues and expenses. So I'll really have 2 slides for you. I have backup slides if you wish, if you want more detail. But looking at our operating revenues that have come in, and we're at the third quarter, so that's the 75th, the benchmark we use is 75%. Revenues are above that for our extraction charges at 89%. As you can see, our surcharge and penalties are way above that, specifically one particular operator, Howling. We have interest earnings. Those haven't just been fully realized yet. And our total is at 144% of what our adopted budget. So that's a good thing. Looking at our expenditure side, again, 75% benchmark. You can see the column on your right and the totals, and they are all below the 75% mark for our labor charges, as well as some of our contracts and other expenses. And the overall expenditures are way down, and that's due to the GSAP, the grant program we have. We haven't received any invoices, so that's a big amount that sits in our budget and hasn't been expended off of, as well as several others. So, as I just mentioned, again, the expense is not recorded, irrigation training research center contract, and then the United model. We haven't got a work plan and invoice for that. So that's why some of the expenditures, you see the 40% is down below the 75. Contingency, you're at 60,000 is still left. You had 2 changes that you made at the July and April board meeting. And these are some of the projected fund balance looking at the end of the year. So this is receive and file, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, any member have any questions? Anybody in the audience have any questions? Okay, motion?
Move to receive and file.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none, so moved. All right, we're going to skip 5, go to 6.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. My name is Kathleen Rydell. I'm here to present Agenda Item 6, the 2011 Annual Report. The Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency is required by Assembly Bill 2995 to produce an annual report. The annual report was issued last week and is available for viewing online at FCGMA.org. The annual report describes the agency's technical, administrative, groundwater management, and fiscal activities for the year and groundwater conditions. Details are presented in the 2011 annual report. I will summarize the key points in this presentation. In 2011, rainfall, evapotranspiration, groundwater extraction, net conservation credits earned, and the number of irrigation efficiency filings are about average. Annual rainfall data is presented in the bar graph shown here in Figure 4. Rainfall data was collected at 5 weather stations within the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency boundary. Overall, average rainfall for 2011 was 12 inches, which is 18% below the 1985 through 2011 long-term average of about 15 inches. The average 5-station evapotranspiration was 91% of the 1997 through 2011 average. Annual reported total groundwater extractions are plotted on the graph in black. The total reported volume of groundwater extracted in 2011 was 116,101 acre-feet, which is 95% of the 1991 through 2011 long-term average. The extraction volume presented in the annual report is a volume reported at the time the annual report was prepared, representing extractions from about 80% of the active wells. The lower than average extraction volume in 2011 during a year of below average rainfall and evapotranspiration may in part be attributed to the 6 to 8 inches of rainfall that fell in mid to late December 2010. Rainfall in the first half of 2011 was 83% of the long-term average, and rainfall in the second half of 2011 was 80% of the long-term average. Rainfall in mid to late December 2010 was 279% of the long-term average of the last 6 months of the year. The basins with the greatest groundwater extractions were the Oxnard Plain Basin, followed by the East Las Posas Basin. Extractions made by agricultural users accounted for about 64%, roughly two-thirds, of the total groundwater extractions in 2011. Irrigation efficiency applications filed totaled 122. The total volume of groundwater extracted under the irrigation efficiency program was 36,798 acre-feet, about a third of the total groundwater volume extracted in 2011. This graph provides a comparison of the 2011 reported extractions to the 2011 allocation available and breaks down the total reported groundwater extraction volume. The light blue bar represents the total allocation available in 2011, the adjusted historic allocation plus baseline. The dark blue bar represents the total reported groundwater extraction. The green bar represents allocation used in 2011. The yellow bar represents groundwater extractions associated with the irrigation efficiency program. Of note, of the 36,798 acre-feet, 16,497 acre-feet is an additional extraction beyond the 20,301 acre-feet of allocation associated with the accounts of irrigation efficiency filers. The purple bar represents groundwater extractions associated with credits redeemed, and the red bar represents groundwater extractions associated with overpumping and surcharge paid. Based on the reported data, extractions in excess of allocations totaled 21,033 acre-feet. The net credits earned in 2011 were 20,351 acre-feet, and the accumulated total credits is 716,733. During 2011, a total of 8 well permits were issued. 4 were for new well installations, 2 were for repairs to existing wells, 2 permits were issued for well destruction. Highlights of 2011 include adoption of 3 ordinances, adoption of 4 resolutions, the agency completed the 2009-2010 Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency annual reports, developed procedures for reconsideration of a motion, adopted an administrative policies and business practices manual, continued historical allocation reductions at 25%, continued testing and data conversion for the FCGMA online software application. Continued to mail newsletters. continued to mail newsletters with semi-annual extraction statements to improve stakeholder outreach and communication, undertook several ordinance enforcement issues. The Las Posas Users Group prepared draft chapters of the basin-specific groundwater management plan, provided irrigation allowance index rollout schedule and updates, held study session with board to receive input from the Strategic Advisory Group regarding credit program evaluation, discussed Ag to M&I transfers and approved adjustments to the City of Camarillo and City of Ventura's extraction allocation in accordance with Section 5.3 of the Ordinance Code. Provided grant funding for 5 groundwater supply enhancement assistance program projects. During 2011, progress was made towards implementing groundwater management strategies and meeting the basin management objectives established in the groundwater management plan. Overall, groundwater conditions and status relative to the basin management objectives are similar to that reported in 2010. As reported to you in the annual progress report in January 2012, many of the 5-year water level trends reported as downward in 2010 are now considered to be flat or upward trending. In addition, the rising groundwater levels coincide with notable water quality improvement in the Oxnard Forebay Basin. This concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Kathleen, from the board members? Okay. From the audience? Yes, sir.
You know what I'm going to talk about? Steve Nash. This gets back to everything I say. The fact that you have 116,000 acre-feet of reported extractions. You don't even talk about the 20% of the semi-annual extraction statements that you haven't received, that haven't been reported. Why is that nowhere? It says that the total extraction amount may be understated. May be understated for the 20% non-reporting. Please.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Where am I looking here? This is also a receive and file. Any other staff comments? Okay. This is a receive and file item. A motion? Okay. Any objection? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Let's go to item number 7.
Set up here. Chair Mohart, board members, Gerhard Hubner again. I'll be presenting this item, which is actually composed of 2 essential elements, which is our annual draft work plan and our preliminary budget. Let's just jump right in here. Today, presenting a summary presentation, basically a high-level highlight of the proposed 2012-2013 work plan. Also be providing you with your 2012-2013 preliminary budget, which have the cost estimates for next year's agency's work tasks for the fiscal year. As you recall, this is something that we initiated in 2008. You've always had a budget, of course. You've always had a budget presentation, but we did a more formal and more detailed process starting in that year. You have before you, as well as the board letter, 2 very large spreadsheets, which one is the work plan with the detailed cost estimates per work task. We also have a budget spreadsheet that has a detailed costing. And we'll go through that. I'll summarize some of the highlights of that as we go through here. We've met many times internally in the development of this. We started early this year. and we've considered future fiscal year priorities and needs in terms of the agency's missions, goal, and objectives. Some of the preliminary numbers that I have for you today, and again, you have this presentation in front of you, so I won't go through each individual number. I think that would be a little tedious, but I can, of course, if you'd like. We do have sufficient revenues, as you can see, total funds available, over $3,800,000. We do have several large expense carryovers. You heard me with the third quarter budget item. The groundwater supply and enhancement assistance program, so $450,000 of that will be carried over because, again, we haven't had any invoices. We have the irrigation irrigation train, that's a typo there. The ITRS, that's the Cal Poly, Dr. Stiles, that was approved. We just haven't received those invoices from him, and that's a multi-year contract. And then we have the county IT services, and we still have that remaining last 15%. They have an invoice for them. They have one more item that they need to complete for us before we will approve that last payment. All right. Let's advance somehow. So these are some of the major items that we have included in the budget. The enhanced meter and well inspection program, that will be discussed in more detail in item number 5 today. That's been moved later in our agenda. We have our online database support, and we have some enhancements we think will be very integral for our irrigation allowance index to fully implement that. Meter calibration, as well as our annual report and our extraction and allocation and credits requests. We do get quite a few of those, and we think there's some simple fixes that will make that more streamlined. We have the regional model upgrade support for United Water Conservation District. We are proposing a small amount for the digitalization of the GMA files. If you can imagine, we have 25 years of paper files. We're at the point where we're running out of room here at the County Government Center. We do have a proposal on how we can get that accomplished and relatively easily, and so we put some money forth in that regard. And we've also included purchase of the weather station that's been discussed before your board in the past, as well as the contract support for the Cal Poly researchers. Staffing, 2.6 full-time equivalents. That's what FTEs stand for our core services. We have 0.5 FTEs to perform 4 additional tasks in our work plan above and beyond. 0.65 FTEs to perform some of the 5 additional tasks that we've identified. We note that we don't currently have staffing of technical staff available to perform those. We are not proposing, and this is per United's request, discontinuing funding for the joint technical staff position. That results in basically a half-time loss of technical capacity that we've had the last couple years. And staffing is basically back to what we had in fiscal year 2009-2010. Work plan is organized as it has in the past. Core tasks, administration, records, technical, legal, and then we have the additional work tasks, which I'll go into some detail. We also took the opportunity this year, and this is something that I like to do, is how can we improve the readability? Is there some things that could be consolidated? So certainly with the work plan, we felt that there were certain tasks that now needed to be realigned with where the work was occurring. So, for example, the ordinance administration really wasn't an administrative thing. It was more legal in terms of how we do things or report things. Similar with the annual report, involved a lot of technical analysis and perhaps some of our data. Fiscal was added to the administrative section just for consolidated purposes, and the record section was retitled to reflect some of the work that we do and some of the requests that we get. In terms of, these are the costing and the various sections. You can see the amounts. They total up what I mentioned, 2.6 FTEs and $518,000.60. $600. $518,006. All right. Moving now to the additional task. If we do get the Prop 84 grant, we're thinking we'll hear this summer, maybe as early as June. If they award that grant, there'll be some work that will need to be accomplished in getting some of the agreements in place with Cayugas, as well as an agreement with Department of Water Resources. Then, of course, we'll have to meet our matching requirements per the grant. GSAT, well, that continues. That actually could have gone into the core side.
Excuse me, Gerhard.
Sure.
Remind me what the Prop 84 grant is for.
Prop 84 grant was two projects. One that had nothing to do with the GMA. It's a salt and nutrient management plan for the lower Santa Clara River. The GMA one was to look at feasibility and delivery of developing the shallow groundwater up in the Las Posas area. So working with Cayugas, or Cayugas, is that? That rings a bell. Okay. I mentioned already the digitalization of our agency files, a little bit of time to prepare the files, irregardless, and then digitize them. And then you've heard at the last board meeting, and you'll hear again as part of item 8, our non-reporters. We've had that on the work plan for several years. We haven't been able to get to that until now. We think it's a priority, and so we've included it this year again. Oh, that's an incomplete slide. So I'm just going to move on. It's an old presentation. All right. This is just the costing of the FTEs and what they amount to in comparison with last year. And the difference you see is primarily the joint technical position. Looking at some of our numbers and the percentage, you can see the various metrics and where the percentage of time will be spent. And similarly, some of the costing and how we've presented it out. And you have that in front of you. Okay. Getting down to the end here, this is the overall slide of where the operating revenues are, where we see, and some of the assumptions that we've made. The pump charges, $130,000 is projected. If you do that at $4 an acre foot, gives you the $520,000. Interest charge, that's basically what we've seen in the past. And then surcharge revenues. You still have one more settlement payment, or I believe there's the fourth of the fifth payment included this year. There'll be one more next fiscal year, the final payment, and then we've included $350,000 as a conservative estimate for the overpumper. Now we could have included more. Again, we feel it's prudent not to overestimate or over-rely on the surcharge. Again, at one time, the operator may decide to change their operation, they may hook, get other water supplies, so we did not include what we got this year. We included what we feel is a conservative estimate. The work plan items, as you can see, broken down into the core and the additional. And the non-labor costs, those are our vendors, our supplies, our services. Again, those are some of the grant programs. That's why that number is fairly large. We have our contingency of $100,000, as we have in the past, and that adds up to the numbers that you see here. We still have our GEMS fund, as you can see, $500,000 was what you sequestered, and $8,500 is the interest earned over time. So, conclusions. 4 acre feet pump charge remains unchanged. You do have a healthy fund balance sufficient to fund the proposed staffing and proposed work tasks and projects. We do have currently insufficient capacity with our technical staff for 5 of the additional work tasks in that separate area. And we will come back to you with options to address that staffing capacity at some later date. Our recommendation today, and there's an additional one, is to receive feedback and comments on the draft work plan and preliminary budget, and then direct staff to schedule for board's consideration the final adoption of both the annual budget and work plan at your June meeting. With that, I'd be happy
Okay.
to answer questions.
Any members have any questions? Yes, John.
What was the GEMS fund for? What's that, 500 and something?
It was set up for what we called extraordinary enforcement cases, where we felt that we might need legal assistance for cases or recalcitrant operators that were not going to comply with our ordinance. So it was felt that we have a prudent reserve.
I'd add to that, Board Member Zergoza. Originally, we didn't have the healthy reserve that we had. The pump charge temporarily went up to $6. Your board was concerned that the increase not be used for anything other than extraordinary legal expenses. So they created this lockbox called the GEMS. I forget what the acronym is, but and that's where that money, where that temporary increase on pump charges went and has stayed since.
Okay, good.
And after we had sufficient money in the account, essentially the board directed that $6 go back to $4.
Gerard created the GEMS acronym, and I must tell you, I don't remember what it means either, but he created
I
it.
never could remember what it
And
said.
if Gerard created it, it's a secret code locked in a vault that we will never
So there's some
figure
GEMS
out.
in there?
G is for Gerard.
All right. Any other board member questions?
Just one other item that Director Zaragoza, the interest earned on that separate fund amount goes back and continues to put back into the GEMS fund.
Oh, I see.
So it earns interest separately, and that interest, Director Craven assisted on that, and that was a good idea.
That's to augment that.
Just continues to build,
build
well,
that up.
albeit very slowly right now, but. I had a question, if you don't mind me continuing. Gerhard, the digitization, what's the cost on that?
The cost on that one surprised me. I thought it would be considerably more, but the fixed cost that we received, we actually did $15,000 and jumped to it. We got 2 bids, and I think the other one was 20 or 25. But $15,000 is the fixed cost to have a contractor come in and do all that work and create a file for us and index that. And I think that's a pretty good deal.
They just come in and take paper by paper and scan it in. And
yeah, I mean, a very laborious, tedious job to feed it in, and then they also have to have the software and the way to index it. And the idea, of course, is that not only will be available to staff, but anybody else out there, that they could be able to do a record search and find anything in our files. And so we've researched, and again, this bid came in, and the district is also exploring, Watershed Protection District is also exploring it, and this software would be compatible, and perhaps might even be the pilot. But.
Okay. The other question I had is, in terms of work priority, we call it a work plan priority, we've had a lot of presentations about meter calibration issues and how to deal with non-reporters and enforcement issues. I'm assuming that's taking a priority in this work plan. It seemed like that was the case in reading through it, but it was a little bit hard to follow in some places.
Yeah, I would say that
that's not going to be left.
We need to get past those issues because that goes to the heart of how we manage the resource. And I've used the analogy before, like a utility. We send out statements, we need to receive them, the information needs to be correct so that our information when it goes to the annual report, it's accurate and complete.
Okay.
Moving forward, I think all of us want to do more technical work. We want to do more policy development. That's our incentive to get past these type of hurdles.
It's been my concept for the last 5 years that, we'd get past this enforcement and historical issues. Rick's nodding his head in a woeful manner.
But as you've seen, it can be the last 10% that take up 90% of our time. It's those recalcitrants, and we'll bring forth, you heard, one of the issues that the board dealt with 15 years ago. That will require, again, some time and effort. But yeah, those are the kind of issues that they take 90% of your time. 90% of the folks are great. They comply with the rules, and it's those 10% that require effort.
Well, I mean, the last reporting thing doesn't indicate 90% are complying, so
Yeah.
we're going to get a presentation on that shortly, I guess, but
Yeah.
I would support us
Guess I would
getting
be
a hold of
generous.
this steer and wrestling it down, because we really got to get on to more important things. And this is a critically important part of the agency doing its mandated work, is
Agreed.
having data that makes sense, and then following up on the folks that you got everybody else following the rules. You can't have some just skating for years and years. And then I think also the agency has to improve its follow-up time. In some cases, I know you've been pushed on to more important things, but I see in some indications we have very large lags between sending out of a first letter and a second response. And if we can tighten that up and maybe couple it with some of these fines that you're proposing, maybe we begin to bring this in order. That's my hope.
Mike?
Yeah, Gerhard, I can't find it right now, but as my reading, I think our legal was like 65 or so. 35 was, I think, was out, and there was
Yeah.
30 that was additional. Are those retainers for 3 firms, or what do we have?
Correct. So we don't have,
They're 10,000 a year apiece, or?
I believe we have 3 on retainer, maybe 5, 2 on 5 and 1 on 10. But those are essentially placeholder firms that if we require various legal expertise, we can tap into it. This year we didn't, I don't believe we utilized that resource at all, so all you had was Al.
Right.
But it's,
But
for
we
budgeting,
we still
put
have
it
to
in
pay them
there.
a retainer.
Pardon me?
We still have to pay them a retainer.
No.
I thought it was in here, there was 30,000 for that.
We have it budgeted. We haven't expended it. Again, we put it in there to have the ability, if your board chooses, or legal or executive officer need to tap into that additional legal resources that perhaps county council, we have that ability. But you don't have to spend it, it's just there.
But in the absence of a retainer, they're free to work for the enemy, are they not?
Sure. That's an Al question. I'm sorry.
Just to respond to that, there are existing contracts, retainer agreements, so to speak, between the agency and those firms. I believe SOMAC, Simmons and Dunn, and Downey Brand, and perhaps one other that I'm not recalling, Stoll Reeves. And the point that Gerhardt was making is that those agreements do not provide for us to pay them, in essence, an upfront deposit. So the money has not been spent. It's been budgeted and authorized by the agreement as needed. And for the past year or so, there have been no requests for legal services from those firms. But they are under contract with the agency, and so they would be bound by the professional rules of conduct for attorneys to do what's referred to as a conflict check before going to work for the enemy or whoever.
I just remember looking through the list, it was a nice list.
Okay, anybody? Anybody in the audience? Comments? Yes, sir.
Chairman Walter, glad to see you're back. Understood you had a nice bicycle accident.
I did.
Okay.
Everybody in this room right now, frankly, looks like a FedEx truck. I'm just telling you the way it is.
I didn't get here at the beginning of this presentation on the item, but I have a question on page 1 of item 7B, underneath expenditures. It says board member insurance. I'm just wondering if I can get a clarification of that as an item of number of $3,800. The reason I ask that question, I would assume that a lot of you are here representing various agencies and organizations which possibly could already have insurance if it is not insurance for the board members. And I was wondering if I can get an answer to that. Is that insurance for the board members?
Errors and omissions.
What is the insurance? It's an errors and omission, I believe.
Yeah.
In our capacity as GMA, making GMA issues, I think it's error and omission insurance, right?
Yes, and if I understand the question, it's why, or is there a need for insurance on top of what a board members, other council or board is providing? And I don't know specifically. My sense would be that there may be coverage issues involving a board member's activity as a director of the GMA that would not apply to the coverage provided by United or the city of Camarillo or whatever, or the county, and hence the need for additional insurance.
We also have a farming representative whose name is nominated out of a slate from Farm Bureau and Ag Association. They are not supplying him insurance because he's so, you know, it gives us a sense of protection if we're out doing something. If I'm out looking at a specific GMA project, doing a GMA issue, or any member doing that, I think that's what we pushed it for. And we do have a member that is not carrying any insurance as aero emissions, and that's a huge liability.
I definitely, thank you very much. The council understood exactly what my question was.
Okay.
And I appreciate the fact that we would cover somebody that does not have any protection. But in the race to try to tighten up any expenditures or keep the budget under control, if this is a simple matter of double dipping or double coverage unnecessary, maybe somebody could explore it and find out for your board.
We'll
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, Bert, you got to give your name for the record here.
I apologize, Bert Perello, and I want to compliment the lady who did a tremendous job on the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else in the audience? I had a discussion with Jeff very recently, and he outlined to me some very interesting things, and I hadn't put it in this context, and I think this is the time and place to have this discussion. We have run this agency as a town hall meeting kind of format for a long time. And there's a good side to it and the downside to it. The good side to it is that people get a chance to speak as many times as they want. We don't have time limits. I'm not slapping a big light button up in here and all that kind of stuff. And so we get a great dialogue of what people want to talk about. The downside of it is we're a very slow agency to make decisions. It takes us a long time to make decisions. We meet 10 times a year. We're dark in August. We take the November board meeting, which essentially falls on Thanksgiving, day before Thanksgiving, and we float that to not falling on the day before Christmas, and we have one meeting in early December, which works out 10 times a year. And I know we make a race out of it. I'm leader of the race because I sit right in front of the clock. And when it goes beyond 3 hours, and I know John has to leave here at 3:15, so we have that problem even today. And we have alternates that come to the meeting. But if we're actually generous, on average, we run a 3-hour meeting. Sometimes a little bit longer, a lot of times shorter, and very few times very short. So I'll give you that. If you actually,
only when you're absent.
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am, I
Chairman.
understand it. But I am not, my plan is not to visit FedEx trucks as a way of solving this meeting problem. No more bikes. But if you put it in context, that means as a board, we meet 30 hours a year. And out of that meeting process, we have a broad section of dialogue that goes back and forth. And one of the frustrations I think that staff feels is that they try to boil down all this discussion that goes back and forth out of 30 meetings and come up with a work that lasts effectively a full year for a staff, and it becomes difficult for them at times to say, geez, I got to figure out between Director A and Director C really what they want, and we don't meet for another month, and so they wind up producing a lot of information that may or may not be relevant, and then we come in the meeting, hear from the public, slice it all over the place, and say, take it back and look at it again, and by the way, our 3 hours is up, let's see you in a month, and they're right back to the same dilemma. And the reason I bring that up is we've had a staffing adjustment. And so right now we have some items on the board. If you go back to the previous slide, it says that we have items and we have no staff to do that. Those issues that we have no staff to deal with are technical in nature, and they eat up a lot of time. And yes, our numbers have dropped because of the staffing changes, so we have technical capacity of 5 tasks, and we got to figure out staffing to deal with that. And so Jeff's comment to me is that if we are in fact going to be relevant as an agency, we heard that from Rob, we've heard that from Mr. Nash, and we've heard it from others, we have to figure out one of two options. and in simplistic terms. Either we spend more money to have adequate staffing to address these difficult issues that have long-term impacts on our constituents, their estates, their land values. The decisions we make could impact their family estate for the next generation. And they're complex. And as Gerhard said, we have some problems that eat up 90% of our time because it's the damn reporting and they won't fill out their forms or whatever it is, or they don't test their meters. Option A is we start renting up staff. Well, when you do that, it runs up costs, and we are very cautious about our costs. Another option would be is that we may have to visit more often, and particularly when we're doing the budgeting process, maybe what we need to do is have a special board meeting dealing specifically with this task list, and maybe we need to go through and say, you know what, we cannot be everything to everybody, because something's got to give, folks. We have a group out there right now, LPUG, working their combined energies off. You guys go to the meetings. We have some of the folks here today. I get reports on it, trying to come up with a solution to a very difficult water problem in their area. That's all being done by the constituents, and our nickel is not being spent. At some point in time, we've got to take that model and roll it over to the Oxnard Plain, which is even, in fact, more difficult than what they're doing in LPUG, and try to duplicate that process. That's kind of our strategy. At some point in time, that LPUG group is going to come before this board and say, hey, we've been gnashing on this for X number of months or years or whatever the number is. We think this is the plan, and they're going to drop a plan in front of us, and they're going to expect us to make some rational decision. We have an option. We can say what we want to do is gear up the GMA staff so we can go through that plan line by line and reconstruct what they have done for the last umpteen months so that we have the correct guidance of whether or not to approve it or not. And I've said to the group, I've said to you, and I've said to folks here in the audience, I'm not going to approve a plan that I don't understand and doesn't meet some objectives. So how are we going to eventually solve that problem? And I don't want to be in a position where they drop a plan on top of us in short order and we don't have the ability to understand the plan. So what are the options? The options are you hire a bunch of staff people to go to the meeting and be part of the planning process, and that's expensive. Or maybe the option is we sit down and we develop the criteria by which the plan has to meet, so that they know what we're going to evaluate it against as they develop the plan. They know that if they bring the plan before this board, it's got to meet these 5 criteria. What are they? We need to spend time doing that. That's a priority for our agency. I don't think it's fair to dump a plan on top of the GMA and turn to our staff and say, okay, now you've got a month to go through it and tell us that the 3.5 years worth of work that the LPUG group is valid, and tell us what to do. I don't think it's fair for the LPUG group to come in and say, hey, don't spend any time looking at it, just take what we do, up or down, because I'm not going to agree to that. So we have to come up with a balance. But in this budgeting process, if we're going to move this ball forward, we have to define the criteria by which we're going to use the GMA staff to its optimum, and not try to create the GMA staff as a duplicate of things that are already going, but in fact become a full partner in this process. Because if they drop a plan on our table and we don't understand the plan and we go, okay, and we agree to it, at some point in time, a year, 6 months, somebody's going to disagree with that plan, and they're going to come before us and say, hey, you're the ones that implemented this plan, now make a ruling on it. Oh my goodness, what do we do now? I think that time is going to happen. I believe that the LPUG group is moving very aggressively. You guys go to the meetings. We're doing the process that you guys wanted us to do. I support that process. I reserve the right that the GMA needs to be part of the end process, because it's going to have to be the regulatory entity that makes sure it's fair. People don't want to hear the word regulation, but that's in fact what we are as an agency. We don't build things, we don't buy things, we regulate things. We got to give our staff the tool to do that. So as we go through this budgeting process, I think we need a workshop. I think we need to give staff a better sense of what they're being tasked to do. I'm sensing from Jeff, I've sensed it from other staff members, that there's an element of frustration on the part of the GMA staff. And the sense of frustration on the part of the GMA staff is they're being pushed in 5 different directions, and if it's not the answers people want, they don't want to spend the money, and they're the fall guys. Why are we doing this? And I'm hearing from constituents, Rob voiced it today, I've heard it from other folks, you folks have probably heard it, that if we keep coming to these meetings and we go around and around and around, we become more and more irrelevant. And my fear is that this is the starting point of making sure the agency is not irrelevant. If the collective wisdom of everybody is that, in fact, we ought to become irrelevant, then let's just fold our tent now and call it quits. I'm okay with that. I'll go back to riding my bicycle. Not in front of FedEx trucks, but I will ride my bicycle. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on the part of some folks out there on what our numbers mean and don't mean. And, you know, each month we hear from Mr. Nash, and frankly, I appreciate your speaking, but a lot of the stuff you're understanding is fundamentally wrong. And I think that's part of our problem of not explaining, or the staff is too bogged down in a lot of minutia. How do we get out of that? We're going to have an issue here dealing with meter readings and reporting, and obviously we're right back to the same problem we had 2.5 years ago. We got to get over that hurdle. You said it just a minute ago. We got to get over that hurdle, and we have to put ourselves in a position when the LPUG group comes to us with their working document, we are ready to respond. We need to give them some guidance going up front that this is the criteria that we're going to evaluate it against. We need to decide as a board what is going to be our process for reviewing that document. If that document comes to us, my position is, okay, I'll accept the document, you explain it, I'm going to hand it to staff, and I'm going to say, I need you, staff, the GMA staff, to put your collective glasses on and look at that document and play it against the criteria we established. And if it meets that criteria, we move forward. If it doesn't meet that criteria, we send it back, and LPUG has to work on it some more. That, to me, I think is a good use of the GMA staff. Not to write the document, but to somehow make sure they can enforce it, because it's going to be a significant document when it comes. And so my proposal would be that sometime before we adopt a budget, we have to have another workshop, specifically on capitalizing on the efficiency or correcting the inefficiency or dealing with how to make the GMA staff responsive to the needs of its constituent and not putting them in a position of feeling like, and I use my term, but what I hear from them as they speak to me is being basically pinballs in the middle of a pinball game, and they don't want to do that anymore. Yeah, John, I'll go to you, and then I think Robert wants to speak.
Yeah, I think we should, have a workshop. I, being one of the new members, I know the members have been here for quite a while, but I think having a mission statement, having an objective, having the mission statement, objectives, and goals meet our budget is extremely important. And what are the mandates? What are the mandates that are required that we have this board? For my understanding too, and I'm sure that we can reiterate that with the folks in the audience, that what's the objective of the Fox Canyon Grant Management Agency, and what's our mission, and what are the objectives, and to clear up the idea of credits and mandates and staffing and so forth, so we can put this plan together with our budget and coordinate it accordingly. It'll be a good education for me anyway as a new member.
And interesting, John, we have a mission statement, we have goals, we have objectives, but a lot of the goals and objectives as outlined in this plan were set in play a year ago. It's time to review it. It's time for us to sit down and try to narrow it as much as we can. And if we can narrow it, we can take our staff and zero in on the issues they have to deal with.
Exactly.
Yes, ma'am.
We've had workshops in the past, and I think it would help. Was it last year? You were not at the July meeting when the budget came up for adoption and the work plan. And we couldn't agree, so we adopted some kind of a continuing resolution or whatever it was.
Oh, the federal government. Yes.
Yeah. And we went until maybe it was the year before, we went that way until we could come up with some agreement. I think it actually would be good for us to plan every year to have a budget study session or whatever you want to call it.
A refocus.
Which would include the work plan for the following year, and just plan on doing that every single year, not as part of a regular meeting, but a special study session.
Okay. Okay, Robert, you want to speak?
Good afternoon, Chairman. Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual Water Company. I couldn't help but as I was sitting back there listening to your description, there was a whole litany of concerns that jumped up immediately in my head. First and foremost was the discussion that's going on here about the Las Posas Basin Users Group. For the first several months that we were actually focused on this, we had very intense discussions laying out what is our goals and objectives. What are the whole basis on which the plan is going to be based upon? And of course, the overriding one is sustainability. We've already done that legwork to begin with. And before we got anywhere down the road, we had to get those principles and what the goals were in place and get accepted by consensus. Group's already done that. Then staff brought it to you. And you've been reviewing this. We've been putting this in front of you every single month. As long as the plan meets those objectives, sustainability, and how we get there, that the basin is no longer an overdraft and everyone gets to do what the hell they want to do, I'm sorry, I don't see how you cannot accept it. Let us meet the objective that we've already put out and already laid out and already fought over. There's 6 guiding principles with goals and objectives underneath. If we meet those, we've done the heavy lifting, we've done the work for you. We'll present you a document that meets that.
Robert, the issue is not that you folks aren't doing your job. I understand that. The question is, has the board, as guidance to itself, before we actually see the final product, have we as a board sat down and literally had a discussion over the goals and objectives and adopted those and said, yeah, we agree with those. And when we get the plan, we're going to take a review of that and review the plan against those goals and objectives. And if it meets the test, then you have a plan. What I don't want, and what I'm sensing could happen easily, is, hey, we've done all the work. Here's the plan. You guys approve it. Ain't going to happen. I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to agree to that. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm telling you, I reserve the right, I've said it from day one, this agency will run the Fox Canyon groundwater management area. Your activity and the task you've been assigned is come up with a working plan that you believe will solve your area. You're doing that. Our job is to make sure we buy into those goals and objectives and not write the language you're writing. And I don't think we've done that. And I want to make sure that we don't come back at the 11th hour when you bring the plan and say, by the way, you know what, I think we need to kind of have a big, long, lengthy discussion over what the criteria ought to be. And you're going, hey guys, what have you been doing for the last 3 years while you've watched us do our work? I believe we're getting behind the time. I want to get equal with you or ahead of you so that you have no questions, that you can demonstrate in your plan that we have agreed with your goals and objectives. In fact, we may have some others that we think are imperative because we've heard from the audience. And if we do that, then I think the agency is willing to buy in. I'm willing to buy in to the plan because then I have buy-in from the staff that says, yeah, we can implement the plan and we can enforce the plan. And therefore the GMA is in fact doing its job. So I recognize you guys start off with a mission statement. I think that's great. I know you've created a working group of managers or a lead group. All of those things are exactly what you need. We need to make sure at the board our responsibility is not circumvented, that our responsibility is that when you bring the plan to us, we're ready to move right with you because we've already developed the criteria. And maybe the starting point is we take what you've done and we start that as a discussion. And we adopt a resolution that says this is the criteria by which we will evaluate the plan, and it may be a duplicate of what you have. I don't know. But if we do that process, and then turn around and do exactly the same process on the Oxnard Plain and say to the folks on the Oxnard Plain, now you have to do what the LPUG group has done. The technique of solving the problem may be different because your problem is different, but the criteria of evaluating that plan will be the same criteria, and by the way, here's what the target is. Run against that target. I think we're working in concert. I'm not fighting you on this issue. I'm telling you that there are some things I don't think we've done as a board to put ourselves in a position to support you when the plan comes to us, and I don't want that lag time. And I think it even speaks to the bigger issue, and the bigger issue is we've got a lot on our plate, and we have a very thin staff. And that staff is telling me they feel like they're being pinged from left to right because they're not quite sure because of so little amount of time that we meet to give them guidance. And our guidance is not clear-cut because we don't meet that often and because of the way we run the meetings. And what I'm proposing is let's use the budgeting process a way of tightening that process up. Let's make sure we give specific guidance to the LPUG group against the target. It may be a duplicate of what you've already done. I'm okay with that if it meets our goals. In the meantime, let's zero in on what we want our staff to do so we're not chasing a whole bunch of things that we don't have time for. And right now, we are understaffed by their own criteria, and it's in the technical side. We have to come up with a solution to that problem.
I guess my closing statement to that is I don't necessarily disagree with anything you have to say. I find it alarming that as far as we've gone down the road, that you're feeling uncomfortable with the work product that we've been putting together.
I'm not. No, wait. Hold on.
You have questions about it and you want to re-examine it. That tells me there's an uncomfortability with what we've already presented you and the process in which we've been going down.
Okay.
And already, I agree, it's better now than a year from now, but we're already a year and a half and 2 years into this. This isn't new.
Let's back up.
This isn't new.
Okay, Bob. I don't have before me a board agreement on what the criteria is going to be that we're going to evaluate any plan that comes before us. I think that's a disservice to the board. It's a disservice to the work you're doing. Maybe we should have done it a year ago, but we're going to do it now and not wait till the 11th hour when you present a plan. I have the right, I have the obligation as a board member to review any plan that comes before me. I have the right to ask questions about it, and I will do that. And the first question I'm going to ask is, does it meet the objectives that the board has agreed to should be the objectives for bringing the Las Posas Basin back to where it should be? Do we meet that criteria? If the answer is yes, then we move forward. If the answer is no, I'm going to say, hey, in this area, you came up with a solution, but our criteria shows you're not going to get the objective. Either we don't understand what you said or you need to clarify. I think that's a good, healthy relationship. What it says is that the process that you guys are going through has got to go through a public review process. I've said it from day one to you and to others in this room. The plan has to be fair from top to bottom. You cannot sacrifice the little guy for the big guy. You can't hold the big guy hostage because of the little guy. There's got to be a fair funding mechanism built into it. It's got to come back to safe yield. It's got to be a plan that we can administer and not create a whole bunch of unintended lawsuits that we can't deal with. Those are the kinds of things that I think that we have to come to agreement with the board. Now, if other board members don't agree with me, then that's why we have to have this discussion. Okay. But I don't want this discussion the day you hand us the plan and say, we never really developed a criteria, and okay, your plan is it. I think that'd be a mistake.
Thank you.
Henry.
Henry Gromlich, Cayugas Municipal Water District. As I understand your comments, Chair Malhart, I believe that your interest is having the board agree and concur on objectives and purpose of the Las Posas plan, and that there be adequate technical review of any draft. And what I would submit for your consideration is that approximately a year ago, we did bring that purpose and those objectives to your board.
Okay, Henry,
Please, may I continue my comments?
No.
Let's stop.
Let's stop for a second. Okay, let's back up. Okay, I think some of your fundamental assumptions are wrong. What you're telling me is a year and a half ago, we brought you something. Okay, I agree with that. That's a year and a half ago. Here's my fear, guys, and what I'm sensing, is that the pride of ownership is now so important that you can't touch our plan because we've done all the work. I don't understand what the fear is. If the plan is a good plan, and I believe it will be a good plan, it will survive. We're not writing your plan. I'm not proposing the GMA staff write your plan. We don't have the technical expertise, we don't have the time, and we don't have the money. But there's got to be a review process. And yes, you brought some stuff to us a year and a half ago. You're going to bring us stuff again in the future. We'll review it then. I don't understand what the concern is. As long as you know what the criteria that we're running against, and it may be exactly the same criteria, then we're all on the same page. But let's get it sorted out now. I don't understand that.
May I continue my comments? What I would submit is that when your board reviewed the purpose and objectives of the plan, we asked for direction from the board whether we should proceed along those lines. Your board gave us that direction. We have committed a draft plan. We submitted it to the GMA staff for review. The draft plan has currently been reviewed by Chris Labor under contract. We have his comments. We understand from GMA staff that if we respond to Chris Labor's comments, that we will have answered their technical concerns. I don't think the Las Posas group fears anything. I'm simply bringing up as a matter of point that your board has reviewed the purpose and objectives of this plan. You have the criteria by which to judge it from. We have completed and submitted the draft, and you have completed a technical review of that with Chris Labor, and that if you're going to begin again that I would suggest that you start where you left off. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from members? I've done enough of my yapping.
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob.
Rob Saperstein for City of Oxnard. I'm a strong believer in self-determination, except for my 14-year-old daughter. So, all of us have our own self-interest, sometimes blinded or not. I would want the board to be realistic if it's going to set the time to develop priorities and develop this kind of criteria. That's then going to be generalized and apply to other areas within the basin. It's going to take some time. I think having a workshop on the technical, up-to-date technical information, unfortunately we don't have a groundwater model that is yet reliable to make some of the decisions that the current groundwater management plan is based on. It's going to be a complicated process, and the Oxnard Plain folks won't necessarily want to follow the approach that the Las Posas users group followed, so I just would allow some time.
Listen. Again, I may not be making myself clear. Okay, so let me try it one more time. The basins in this district, this agency, need to be in safe yield. Whatever plan it is, it's got to be fair across the board, up and down, small to big, big to small. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to have a funding mechanism that people buy into, and it's got to be manageable. How you get there, I don't care. So if the folks on the Oxnard Plain don't want to do it the way the LPUG people do it, I don't care. But you ought to know that for me, when somebody brings a plan and it's not fair, I'll vote no. When it's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors and it doesn't get to safe yield, I'll vote no. That's pretty simple and straightforward. But you have never heard it directly from this board in those simple terms. And it's that simple I want it to be. I'm not telling you how many meetings to have. I'm not telling you who to go to the meetings. I'm not telling you how to put the management group together. I'm not telling you where to put the money. I don't care. Because I've come to the conclusion that this agency, as small as it is, and with the restrictions of funding and the like, will never have the horsepower to deal with all those little subtleties. It will be tasked with the issue that when somebody comes before us in a year and a half from now and says, this plan is not fair because they're not following the plan, the responsibility of making the final ruling will rest on this board, and therefore we have to make sure that we've set the criteria and we have a chance to look at the plan that in fact it does accomplish those, because you're going to ask us to administer it. So I'm not telling OPUG how to do their business. I'm not telling LPUG how to do their business. I think it's time for the board to give this staff some very specific direction. And we're not going to solve all the problems in one workshop. I understand that. But if we can whittle this workload down and zero on 3 or 4 items and accomplish really some 3 or 4 important items, then next year you won't come before this board and say, you know, if you're not going to be relevant, you know, we might as well not have meetings. I mean, people are talking both sides to me on this issue. If the GMA is going to be relevant, it's got to do something concrete. We can't keep having meetings going over what T and I has been crossed in minutes and the like and other little things that we have to deal with that eat up time. We need to get to the hard, heavy lifting. I hear the message. And the hard, heavy lifting LPUG is doing. They're the first ones out of the chute, and I admire them for their tenacity, and they're willing to have the meetings and the work they're doing. At the same time, I don't want to hold them up when it comes time for their final plan. And I better make my peace now, and this board better make the criteria now. And if we say to you in the Oxnard Plain, this is the criteria we put on LPUG, and they met it, we expect you to meet the same. If we do all of that, I think we're doing our job at the GMA. And I believe that we ought to have that discussion. And I believe that unlike in years past where we've kind of accepted the budget and gone, okay, fine, I think we need to narrow it down again. I think we need to have that process. And maybe nothing will change, but at least we've had the process. Because the frustration of the GMA staff is growing. They're growing because they're spending time doing minutia work, and they know it. They're spending time doing work and not getting the respect for the technical stuff they have to do and the complexity of the problems, and they know it, and I hear about it, and I'm trying to put a stop to that. And the only way I can put a stop to that is we got to focus in on what's important and what's not important and give LPUG the green light to go forward so they know what the goal line is they're running to. And if it's the same goal line they've already defined, then we need to support it. But we ought to have that discussion.
Absolutely agree with all of that. I didn't want to be disrespectful and turn around and walk away as you were talking. I agree with all of that you said. My only point is that's a complicated discussion.
Heck yes.
Allow some time.
Hello, yes.
Yeah, and just even getting to the concept of sustainability is complicated.
Yes, but we better have some criteria.
And I sympathize with the GMA staff that they're, you know, I would even shrink it to 1% of the folks cause 90% of the problems and 90% of the expenditure of time. It's unnecessary. It's every organization's problem. So all for it.
Susan, do you want to? Do you want to hear from Susan first, or do you want to speak? Susan, please.
Susan Milligan, Cayugas. Mine's a little bit more of a question. You talk about establishing guidelines. If it's sustainability and it's those general kinds of concepts that LPUG has come up with, I don't think there's going to be any angst anywhere. I think the concern is, are there going to be some guidelines that are surprises to us after the last year and a half that are more specific or something different than what we've been working to? So I don't know if you can clarify what you're thinking about.
I can't.
Okay.
Okay, I can't and I won't.
Okay.
Because I don't know.
Okay.
But I will tell you this, Susan. This board has never made a decision without doing it in public and hearing from everybody, go up and down the flagpole. Mm-hmm. We'll do the exact same process. Everybody will be able to parade in front of us and say, that's not fair. Why did you even consider that?
Okay.
But we'll have the discussion.
Okay.
And I hope out of that discussion, we will narrow the focus down on the critical issues that this agency is responsible for. And it's responsible to manage the groundwater for the benefit of everybody, mm-hmm. and do it quickly, mm-hmm. and sustainably. And if we set that kind of objectives and we get pushback in every one of those, we might as well fold our tent because we're irrelevant and we'll go home.
Yes,
if we don't
guidelines.
If we don't, and guidelines and deadlines, and some document that is enforceable that we can interpret. If we can do all of those things, folks will be better for it. We as an agency will be better for it. I think we have to have that discussion.
The deadlines is the scary thing with respect to LPUG. The deadlines is scary with respect to LPUG as compared to OPUG.
Hold on. I told you what the process is going to be. We'll throw it up and we'll throw it out, and you guys will bat it back. It goes up and down. That's the way we've run the agency for the 27 years that I've been here, and we'll do the same. So we'll have that. I have no idea where the discussion will go. I'm hoping out of the discussion this board can agree to some criteria by which we will evaluate a document, that you will know what staff is looking at and what staff will advise us, and that's their responsibility. And our responsibility as board members is to listen to them. And if people expect that I'm not going to listen to staff, the GMA staff, we might as well call it right now, because I'm not going to do that. Because that's not the way your board has the right to listen to what your staff does. The United board listens, the county staff board has to listen. That's the way we do it. We'll do it in public. We'll do it in a forum. We can run it up and down the flagpole as much as you want, and we'll get pushback where you think it's appropriate, and we'll come to some consensus. And we'll try to boil this workload down to something that we can manage. That's my vision.
Thank you.
Dave.
Well, there's a whole lot of things said there, and let me touch on a few that just are in my mind. We had a real nice setup when we had the joint person in Brian Bondi. He was a GMA person, he was a United person, and in a sense, GMA had a person at the meetings every day. And that was kind of that nice juxtaposition of GMA staff involvement in a outside process. I still think that's a possibility, and that is perhaps something this board wants to consider suggesting, is that there be a staff person at those meetings still. Maybe not everyone, maybe once a month, but perhaps that would alleviate some of the feeling of maybe a separate entity or group running perhaps in an opposite direction than where the board feels like it ought to be. I say I have to agree with the comments we've heard from the folks in the audience, that we've had a lot of information in front of us about what they propose, what they're doing, where they're going, and it's been very consistent and very logically laid out. So I can understand a certain amount of jumping up with frustration, like, well, whoa. We laid out what we were going to do for you. You said do it, and now maybe you want to change it. Wait a minute. So I think that's where that's coming from, and that's understandable. With regards to the staffing issues, I never thought I'd say it. I want to turn the recorders off, because I've always been wanting to reduce the budget at every turn, but these enforcement and legacy type historical issues just keep haunting the agency, and they degrade our reputation and our ability to get anything done, and so I'm in support of this boots on the ground person that we're going to hear about. I think that's a great idea. I'm in support. I'm not sure we need more professional people like engineers and geologists, but perhaps we need maybe some more technical people to help with some of these I don't want to call them paperwork issues, but essentially it's tracking down wells, it's looking at maps, it's these kinds of things that I'm not sure we need engineers and geologists doing. If that's a reasonable thing, we can have that discussion in a workshop, and we can have a discussion about the work plan and the staff required to do that plan. I think it's a great idea. Let's do it in a couple of weeks and get going. I frankly have always had trouble kind of deciphering the work plan document, because I see redundancies in different categories and areas, and so I'm always suspicious of that. It seems to me, at least at first view, that there's some padding going on. But again, I've done budgeting. It's difficult to throw a number out there, and then they've got overhead and other things to throw into it, so it makes it seem a lot more expensive than it ought to be. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Mike?
Yeah, I would concur with what David said in his opening statement. I think that the relationship that has been available with Mr. Bondi working for 3 entities as a facilitator, he didn't guide or drive it, he facilitated it. And I think everybody had access to whatever they needed. And if some people failed to harvest the value of listening to it, I have little sympathy for them.
Okay, John?
Well, I agree that we need to have the workshop and the mission statement and objectives and a study session for, especially for me to understand the whole process, number one. Number two, and like you say, and it's difficult to come and approve a project or a program that I really don't understand. But to me, it would be more beneficial to understand where we're headed and what the mission is of the ground management agency, and how we can expedite and also work with the concerns on the credits. I'm here about credits. I know that the city of Oxnard has problems with the credits and other agencies, so that we can fully understand what the credits are, what we can do with it, what is the plan, and how those folks can meet those objectives. So I think a workshop is needed.
Okay, Charlotte?
I agree with David.
Okay. Am I hearing that we need a workshop, at least for the budgeting issue? Okay. I don't know if folks have their calendars. Maybe the best way to do it is, Jeff, you're going to have to go through a process of calling the members, unless we come up with a date that we can agree to now. My schedule, I'm off, as I told you, for the rest of the month. Where it goes on after that, I don't know. It all depends on what my hip does here. Or we can submit our calendars to you, and
I'll have somebody pull you for all of your available dates.
Okay.
Board member board should say when to do it as soon as 2 weeks from now.
I'm available next week.
all right, another option. I'll throw out another option. We do have one specific agenda item that we agreed to hear this issue of the constituent with their well. We could have a very, very short, quote-unquote, meeting agenda, and then turn the balance of that meeting into a workshop. That's another option.
I think that one item is going to turn out to be longer than we'd want. And
Okay.
they don't want to sit through our discussion.
Well, we could put it at the front end if we wanted to, so it's up to you.
I just think that
Okay.
either way it won't work.
All right, so you're going to have to poll the members to find out what our schedule is and see if we can come up with an agreed-upon date.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
what's the timeline on the budget? When do we have to adopt the budget?
Before July.
Before July, so
But remember, was it last year or was it the year before that we adopted the previous year's budget for 1 month?
It was 2 years ago.
2 years ago. So if we had to, we could do that. But I think we ought to meet sooner than later.
Okay.
I'll have to check my
All right, so we'll pull you back as soon as possible.
Okay.
All right, very good. All right, let's go to, now, we got to receive and file this,
This is draft, isn't it?
yeah, but I thought that was our, what did I do with it?
Well, the direction is that, as you mentioned, we will have a study session.
If I might suggest, I'm not thinking a person by person, what it is they're going to be doing, but if it could be somehow laid out in such a way that, you've heard some of my comments about how I think we ought to have a person at LPUG. We ought to, we've got this boots on the ground person. For example, the categories show, 5, 6 different tasks with $1 amount. And it's difficult to ascertain, what's what.
Right.
How can we prioritize if we can't see exactly what it is in each thing that we're looking at? So it's maybe not person by person, but it's tasks that you had in mind that equal that number. Does that make sense?
We can break it out that way.
We don't have to vote on it. You can go.
Yeah. All right. I'm not looking to cause a week's work of worth here, but okay.
Okay, all right, we all set scheduling a budget hearing? All right, let's go to item number 8. John has to leave. Thanks, John.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. For the record, my name is Rick Virgutz. I'll be presenting item number 8 today. follow up with non-reporting well operators, and I'll try and keep it brief. So today's presentation is essentially a follow-up from what you heard in April. We talked with your board about a number of issues with the semi-annual reporting for 2011. So, the groundwater extractions in the GMA are reported by well operators. They're the link in the field between the data that comes into the GMA and the field. And every 6 months, well operators are required by the ordinance to report extractions on these groups of wells called COM codes. So in 2011, about 20% of those well groupings were not reported by the operators. Result, we don't have data on the extractions, we don't have payment, and also an important consideration is that it's costly in terms of staff time to fix these issues. So your board asked staff to propose an approach to move through it and get it handled. This is the approach. So essentially we'll be contacting the well operators by telephone if possible and verify their information, tell them what's required by the ordinance. This is one of these data issues. We've already made some phone calls actually just to get a sense for what we're dealing with. So we need to get our data updated as part of that process and probably work to train some of these operators on how to file. We'll send letters, certified mail, return receipt if necessary. We may not need to do that in every case. Some of them we've already talked to. They said, gee, I'm sorry, I'll send it in. I think they will. But we are proposing a $250 civil penalty if they don't get back to us after that initial telephone call. We want to put a short time frame on the operators to get us the information that we need to move forward. And so the purpose of that is to essentially encourage them to not drag their feet, but to get whatever reporting they haven't done, whatever payment they haven't done, to get it wrapped up right away and get it in. Normally what we do when that happens...
Rick,
yes.
so clarify for me. The forms are due at a certain date.
Correct.
And if they don't show up, then you're going to give the well operator a call.
Correct.
Within what time period?
Well, for the ones that are already past due, we'll be calling them, well, we'll continue calling them over the next week or so. And after we make contact with them, we'll provide them 3 weeks to turn around and get us the information.
So then I would assume that if you've got 25 operators who didn't send in their paperwork, they're going to get phone calls that week following the due date. And then within 3 weeks, you don't receive the required paperwork, then a fine is due.
Well, it sounds like you're talking prospectively. In the future, I've kind of split this into what we do about those that didn't file for 2011 and what we want to do moving forward.
And again, tell us when those were due.
So for the people that didn't file in 2011, those were due in March of 2012. So our approach with those is to call them, say, we need it, you've got 3 weeks. If the ordinance requires you submit it, we're going to provide you 3 weeks. If we don't get it, we're going to levy a civil penalty of $250. The whole purpose is just to get it in here so we can move on. Prospectively, so say in August or September of this year, when the 2012-1s are due, we're thinking that at that point, if they don't come in by the due date, maybe we don't give them 3 weeks. Maybe we just levy a civil penalty at that point. We'd want to have some discretion on that. But the problem we see with waiting, it takes months and months to rectify this stuff.
Well, that's my point, is that it seems to me there ought to be a procedure established that is just real cut and dry for everybody. And it's not, draconian if everybody misplaces a bill or a piece of paperwork, but if after the 30 days of the due date, then there's a consequence. You miss your credit card bill, you're late on your phone bill, there's a late payment. You pretty much accept that you blew it. So I think we really need to get moving to that point where we have specific periods where something happens if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And then we get to a, we don't let all this time go by before we actually make even the phone call. And then when you get them 30 days after that, and then they get another 6 months, and then you guys, then you really do, you've created more work than what was there to begin with, because now we're trying to track past payments and unreported and civil penalties and.
That's exactly right. The timing's terrible. The longer we wait, we get ourselves wrapped up into the next semi-annual period.
So that's what I kind of like to see.
And dealing with
some sort of standard set of procedures where, it's due on the 1st, 30 days, okay, you're late, you got a $250 fine. If you're another 30 days, now we move into, the next stage of penalties, and it's got to have some sort of a significant hammer to move it forward.
What I would propose is that 3 weeks prior to the due date, we send them a registered letter or a phone call that, just as a reminder, you have this due date in 3 weeks.
So this is for people that are already late, but we've given them.
No, these are for people that are in that 6 months. The 6 month notice goes out. It goes out July 1st, whatever the beginning period is, July 1st. Your well is in the criteria. You have 6 months in which to get your report done. Thanks. You have 6 months in which to get your report done. The due date is prior to December 31st, year X. That's the way the system works, right?
Right. So
now they got a notice. They got 6 months to get the notice. 3 weeks prior to December 31st, that's when the registered letter goes out. By the way, we have not received your report. You had 5 months in which to submit it. Just as a reminder, 3 weeks is going, and we start the clock before the end of the period. It's just a friendly reminder. That way, the process of the penalties begin, and we don't get into this. I'll give you a phone call in a week, then I'll give you 3 weeks, then you have a month, and we go on and on again. We need to get it more mechanical. And with the reporting system we have now, the computer can spit out, hey, we sent out 50 reports in this 6 month period, and 40 came back, and with 3 weeks to go, we're still lagging 10.
Mr. Chair, that's fine for the future. This was on the last agenda, and we asked them to come back with something for the people that were already late. So I think that generating something in December is
Well, okay, all right.
is not appropriate for this particular.
Okay, all right, I accept that. But I think we ought to do that for all future mailings that go out. Is with regards to the ones that are currently late, I think we have to deal with what Dave said, and that is we have to back it up and treat it like a credit card. You're late beginning day one. And
okay, yeah, that was my next question. Because Charlotte has a good point. We're dealing with a different issue of people who are already late and behind. They've already come up against fines and penalties, have they not?
yes, and when they file, when they tell us how much was extracted, that's when those would be calculated, the interest and the penalties. But there's no special penalty on top of that.
So why are we giving any more time? Why not send out a registered letter, say you're 6 months behind on your filing, you have already incurred civil penalties of X, continued refusal to file gets you this.
So
why any more?
He can't tell him what X is until he knows what the number is that they haven't reported.
But, right, so what we could do is send them a letter saying, you're late, you've already incurred 6 months of interest and penalties on the unpaid amount.
Okay.
We don't know what that is, but it's going to be charged. And the longer you wait, the more the interest and penalties will accrue.
620 hours.
I would answer the question just a little bit differently. We can certainly do it that way. In the past, your board's been a little bit cautious about turning us loose on it, and so we've given repeated notices before we've. So we're hearing you, and we could certainly set it up that way.
We've been trying to not, just be a Gestapo over here, but I think we're going to have to get a little more.
Dave, you're changing.
I know.
I think you mischaracterize us making you more cautious. The problem was to verify that people are adequately noticed, and do that in a manner that you can demonstrate some proof that you in fact have made a good faith effort, so they can't appear before us as some have.
That
saying,
was one of the issues, yes.
We never heard from you. So to me, you have to combine by telling people and getting their answer that they have received it by one method or another. I want to ask you the question here, Rick. You have estimated 620 hours, and you have 82 last month. Now we're talking 80 operators who are a problem. That figures out to be 7 3/4 hours per operator. That's a one-man day per person. At 80, that's 16 weeks of one person doing nothing but trying to contact us. I cannot believe that that's how much time is necessary. Secondly, I wish we would get on to the thing of having the verification person, Mr. Chairman, because this is low-hanging fruit. Turn loose somebody who's knocking on the door and saying, where the hell are you? Because what happens if some of these people, they haven't contacted for 2 cycles? What proof do we have that they're getting the correspondence?
Well,
are people returning the correspondence signed that they've got it, but they just don't want to respond?
All right. To help move this agenda along, staff has a proposal with steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. My recommendation would be to adopt their proposal. Let's get on with going backwards in time. My proposal would be on future mailings that 3 weeks or a month prior to the due date, a reminder notice set out so we can move this whole time frame up so that we can move on to this issue of somebody on the ground. And are we going to go down that route? So it says here, recommendation, provide direction to staff and consider adopting Resolution 2012-03, which is a resolution that essentially establishes the civil penalties, all the things we talked about. I would say let's move ahead and adopt this to get action of cleaning up this past problem.
And Mr. Chairman, I would like this to be sure with Al's help. One of the issues I had last month was that I thought we passed this once and it was good forever. It was coming out, it had a sunset date on it. This one now, this resolution does not appear to have a sunset date, which means it'll be in force in perpetuity, will it not?
That is the intent.
So we won't have to visit this nonsense again.
Okay.
I have one question
Yes.
about the resolution. How can we adopt it on the 23rd of May and have it effective, including a penalty on the 1st of January? 5 months prior.
Well, the effect of the resolution is merely to set the amount of the penalty. The ordinance code already provides that an operator who violates any provision is subject to a penalty up to $1,000 per day. That was in effect on January 1. So it became a violation when they failed to submit their report by the due date. This is merely establishing the amount of the penalty that will be imposed. So it was a violation on January 1st. This is merely setting the amount of the fine.
I still don't see how we can go back in time with an effective date.
Well, and part of that was in response to Director Borchard's concern, which is that we not set up additional procedures giving extensions of time to operators who do not comply with the existing regulations. Those procedures are already set forth in the ordinance code. And so the intent of the resolution was not to establish grace periods or additional opportunities for these non-compliant operators to come into compliance. It was to just establish that the amount of the penalty for their violation is, in this case, $250.
Bob, you got it. Oh, there you are. Bob.
Set it for June 30th. It accomplishes the same thing, gives you 30 days. The objective here is to get it in place before the next reporting period ends, which is June 30th. And you catch the people that are delinquent.
Part of the objective was to go for the ones that were in the past. And having that date was the reason we set it at January 1st. The past, the most recent semi-annual.
But his point is, if they haven't done it now,
No, we can't charge them.
if they, no, what he's saying is, if you make it effective June 1,
June 30th.
June
Give
30th,
you 30 days.
and if they get it in between now and June 30th, okay, they're in. They've cleaned up the problem. We've got the bulk of it in, and they cleaned up the problem. But if they don't even get it in by June 30th, penalties go forward, and they're probably not going to get it in anyway.
If they haven't done it yet, they're not going to. They're not going to suddenly find the paper and start cooperating and mail it.
So
Same people.
the effective date of this, just change it, the effective date of the civil penalty, so we haven't really lost any potential money, but we've solved the problem. The effective date of the civil penalty structure is June 30th, 2012.
Chair Mulhart.
Can we do that?
You could do that. My comment would be that you solve one problem, you create another, and this was Director Kelly's comment about, do we need to keep revisiting this every year? If you build in that June 30 deadline into this resolution, unless that is changed for next year, operators are going to have, you're going to have effectively amended the ordinance code to provide that instead of being due on February 1st,
We're talking the
statements
effective date. We're not talking a deadline or a
Okay,
sunset.
wait, hold on a second, to solve this problem.
Right.
What if we adopt this with June 30th, 2012, and the 1st of June, at the June meeting, we adopt a whole new ordinance that has no sunset to it?
This doesn't have a sunset.
But Al's saying it does.
Well, how does it create a sunset if we change the date January 1st to June 30th?
To clarify, it doesn't create a sunset. What it does is effectively amend the ordinance code by, instead of saying the reports are due February 1st, now you're going to be saying they're due June 30th. And at that point, if they're not submitted, a penalty will be imposed.
No, it says the effective date of the civil penalty structure is June 30th. That's what it would say.
But these are for reports that were due on February 1st.
But it wouldn't mean we have to continue adopting it every year.
No, you wouldn't. What I'm saying is that you've modified the requirement of the ordinance code as to when an operator needs to submit his annual report.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Based on your legal opinion and your advice to the board, leave the ordinance as drafted with the effective date January
1st.
2012.
My opinion is that it's legally sufficient as drafted.
Okay, then let's just stay with that.
So operationally, then, we can apply that to the people that haven't filed, but then moving forward, Director Borchard, I just want to make sure, you had indicated that if they don't get it in by the due date, this is moving forward, we give them a little bit of time and give them 30 days, and then we hit them with a civil penalty. I think what this would do moving forward is instruct us to assess that civil penalty the day after the statements are due. And I want to make sure that's known.
I don't read that. In the first paragraph, it says, requiring the extraction to be reported twice per year, generally August 1st and February 1st, or 30 days after the date of the letter requesting the submittal. I guess that's talking just about the reporting, isn't it?
Right.
Bottom line, I don't really care how you guys go about it, but I just would like to see an organized procedure that buttons it up and makes it very clear for everybody.
Okay.
All right.
And then it also gives you, it tasks the agency with, periods that, letters go out.
All right.
Certified letters.
Hold on a second, Dave. Sam.
Sam McIntyre, Burwood. One quick comment. Quit babying everybody. It's due. You send them a registered letter, Your first letter is registered, it's due, and fine them some money. Don't fiddle around with $250. Make it a 500 or 1,000.
Okay. Sam, do we include a gun with the, or a knife that they can actually?
And, Mr. Chairman, I concur with him on the first letter. We've been through this discussion before of the relative cost of sending a registered letter, and Gerhart and I had this back and forth for some time, and I would hope we don't have to revisit that.
Do we have the right to change the civil penalty from $250 to $500 today?
Yes, you do.
All right. I would make a motion to adopt Resolution 2012-03 with the amendment to change the civil penalty to $500.
I'll second that one. We'll name it the SAM resolution.
The SAM override. All right. Any other discussion on that? All right. Any discussion in the audience? Mr. Perello.
Thank you, Chairman Mulhart. Working for the post office, anybody can sign your registered letter. If you really want to tighten it down, get a register restricted. That means the individual that got the letter addressed to them has to be the one that signs it, and there would be no wiggle room. A register restricted letter versus a registered.
Okay,
Costs a
hear
few
that?
bucks more.
Staff? All right, let's see if we can do that. All right, let's have a roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Fortune?
Yes.
Okay.
Could we have presentation 5, please?
Item 5.
Item 5, there we go. Thank you. Item 5. In our average meeting, this has gone over our average 3-hour meeting. This is really good.
I would tell you that we did 9 pages of minutes, and Leader Craven happened to get us through by 3:18, it says in the minutes.
Yes, sir. Real quick.
Good afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Rick Birgutz. I'll be presenting item number 5 today, concept level approach for agency flow meter and well inspection program. So let me get going on it. This is an information item.
Yeah, if to kind of cut to the chase, because I am watching the clock here. Do you have counsel?
I've got about 25 minutes.
Okay. If I may, let me see if I can summarize for a second. We had at one time the idea of putting a automated meter reading on. We got a grant. We went through a long period of discussion, decided that's probably not the best way to go, and so we gave up that grant, and we talked about actually having a body on the ground. So we have discussed this over a number of areas, and there was a big, long discussion of all the things this individual may or may not do, and staff was tasked with the job of giving us a concept, some initial cut at it, and they want feedback from us on where we think we ought to go on either taking the concept to the next level or tabling it or the like. Is that a fair summation of what you're looking for right now? Okay. So what I'd like to do is, before we hear from the board, I see Robert is there, so let me hear from Robert. If there's anybody else in the public who wants to talk about it, and then we'll open it up for a quick discussion on what you folks want to do with regards to this concept to give staff some guidance. Robert.
Good afternoon, Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual. I'm actually here to speak in favor of this. I like this idea. The two things that come to mind with me as I was looking through this that I would like to tweak, or the idea has to do with on page 5. In particular, about a third of the way through the page there, we're talking about 826 field checks for the mainly active wells and some inactive wells. And then 402 of these would require field checks and some hand-holding. I'm looking at this and went through this and ran some numbers in my head on back of the napkin type stuff. I can see that those can be easily, I'm going to say it again, easily completed within year 1. In year 2, the great majority of these wells out there, municipals, ags that are up front and all that, are going to require a picture. You get it documented, get it in a database. You don't have to go back to them each and every year. So that workload drops off, and now you move down to task item number 3 and number 4, where you can use the same person again. The second issue about this, as I was looking at this, I have a disagreement with staff as to what the level of expertise that's necessary in order to go around and do the field checks here and the overall dollars. What I would propose and what I'm requesting is the dollar amount that they have for $78,545 actually be bumped up to $100,000 for 1 year. The amount of work that is going to be required be increased, and then you do a very broad request for proposals and throw it out to the public and let the brain power out there that are private industry individuals come back and make a submittal to the county as to how we can get this job done. And let us figure out what our hourly rate is going to be for a person in order to complete the job. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments on
Excuse
this?
me, Robert. When you say bump it up to 100, would that be for the 1 year period, or would that cover a multiple year period?
It would be for the first year, and based upon that pilot project, you can see how much workload gets done. As staff has it here, and I ran them somewhere around their estimate is about $225,000, $230,000 to get through the entire workload. I'm thinking it's not going to be any more than $200,000. There's $75,000 times 3, or $77,000 times 3. 144, 221. I'm thinking that if you budget $100,000, you're going to come in under that, and the entire thing get done over a 2-year period.
So you're saying budget 100,000 and these 4 bullet points beyond the RFP as the work task.
And then let the
whenever it gets done, it gets done.
Yeah, and let the individuals specify what they can get accomplished within 1 year, and leave that as a measurement task in order to tie performance toward it. I don't know. Get creative then as to how the money is collected.
Robert, I would offer meet with Kathleen and Rick after the meeting. One of the things they put together is a very, very detailed spreadsheet that I didn't attach to this because we were looking at the concept, but they went line by line and really did a detailed analysis. So anyway, offer that.
Okay.
Okay.
I would suggest if we go back and review the minutes, I asked last time that this be put to bid. And I repeat what Robert just said, and that is to privatize this and get it done. I don't like to see the retirement and the benefits lifetime forever. Every time we add another county employee or our employee, we're inheriting legacy issues forever.
We go through quality-based selection, generally speaking, depending upon who it is we're going to hire. That requires that we request proposals and we review them in a competitive way. Depending upon who we hire or don't hire, we may not be able to consider price. That's state law. But we will get the best value for the buck. And we will be out bidding it, as you suggest.
You're not, this is not a PWAC person.
No, it's not.
Jeff, when you said you were not able to consider price, what does that mean?
The state law requires for contracting for certain services, with architectural, engineering, other professional services, that you use quality-based selection. And quality-based selection says you don't consider price. You go based on their qualifications. You negotiate a price afterwards, after you select somebody, and if you don't agree with the price, you toss them out and go to the next one. Now, you're going to see all sorts of variations on quality-based selection depending upon which firm you go to or which city you go to. Because there's all sorts of interpretations. Oxnard's recently been chastised for the way they did it. But you do not, I've heard of cities requesting proposals with prices attached in a sealed envelope. And the sealed envelopes get opened and prices considered. Technically, that's against the law. We won't be doing that. Now, this really depends upon who we select for the service, and I suppose that's going to come from the work session that we're about to have on the budget. I suspect that your board's going to discuss this in more detail, and we're going to decide what it is we want, and depending upon the outcome of that conversation, we might likely be using QBS. But this isn't, we're going to go hire our friends or brothers or sisters, or another permanent employee to suck on the public tit, so to speak. We're going to do this the way we do all of the rest of the business in this agency.
Any other questions? Mike? All right.
I was just wondering if Tommy Staben would get to bid on this one.
Yeah. I've got 2 folks that want to speak on this. Okay.
Chairman Mulhart, just reading this paragraph, it makes no indication of professional services. It says you will not hire a California licensed geologist or engineer. I hope that you will consider an organization called Citicorp. They've been, currently one is in Oxnard, one is in Ventura, but the city of Fillmore has hired them. They are able to do exactly what is described here, and I do not believe they will come anywhere near the amount of money that's listed or suggested to be increased. I certainly hope that their organization is considered.
If I may respond to that, I would not recommend Citicorp to your board. We've used them in the past. There are a number of problems with their services. So you won't be getting that recommendation from staff unless you direct it.
I would hope that you would check with Mr. Efren Gore of the city of Oxnard. He might disagree with Mr.
I think we'll sort those details out later, but okay, I've heard the message. Dave.
Chairman Mulhart, Board. Dave Souza, Pleasant Valley County Water. I'm taking the Sam McIntyre stand here. If you're going to pay somebody $113 an hour to teach people basic math skills, give them a calculator or hit them in the head with a board. They're too dumb to operate a well. That's kind of high-priced math training. There's a lot more things that this money could be spent on than teaching people math, if this is a big part of the problem. Along with not reporting, and some people just shouldn't be able to operate a well. They're too dumb.
You know, I had that same feeling. Some people shouldn't be operating FedEx trucks at one moment in my life. So I'm bonding with you, Dave, on this one issue.
You know, we don't get Dave up here very often. So,
yeah, no, that's amazing.
So
yeah.
When he speaks, I think we better listen.
Yeah. Let me, if I may, since we're going around, I have a couple of concerns. First of all, we went through a long discussion of having a meter electronically transmit, and we had a grant that would get us started on that, and staff spent a lot of time recommending that process. And we said, oh my God, and Mike, you ran through a bunch of numbers and said, man, when this is done, this is $1.2 million. Geez Louise, this is incredibly expensive. I could see us having $50,000, $100,000 to get started, $50,000 to sustain it. You run those numbers over 10 years, you're at $500,000. And we've had cases where we've had folks come parading in front of us and saying, there is no way in the world I'm going to let a GMA person come onto my private property, and so we get a whole bunch of property rights. I mean, you know, even the meter testing, the feedback I've got on meter testing, the number of phone calls that go back and forth, people aren't there, the tester gets there, things aren't right, so there's a cost associated with that. It's not a simple case, boom, fill up, hey, by the way, I'm going to come by and look at your whole well setup. What the hell are you, not on my property you're not, what authority do you have? This is not a simple problem. It's the exact same issue that when we did the meter calibration discussion, the group that went through that came back with a consensus, and we spent time coming up with a whole protocol, and now here we are 4 years later beating ourselves to death because we can't get people to do the most basic thing in the world, and that is to get their meter tested. And it's so blatantly obvious we got to get a meter tested to validate the numbers that are coming into our system so we know what's going in the aquifer and out the aquifer, because we're sitting on a multi-million-dollar environmental problem under our area called recharging the aquifer. I have problems that I don't care how much you pay somebody to do this. The bulk of that energy, it's not just getting up in the morning, racing out and looking at Farmer Jones, and now you start taking pictures of his setup. I mean, I'll just tell you, my 3 brothers would come unglued if somebody waltzed onto our ranch and started clicking photographs of our whole setup, because they're going, what the hell is this all about? And by nature, my older brothers and my younger brother are not that suspicious, but it's just odd. So I have problems that the boots on the ground solution may not be the panacea to solving all our problems. I think it may create even more problems than we have, because we'll start going down a road and never get a closure to it. So I have problems with that. I have problems with the cost. Even if it's $50,000, over 10 years, that's $500,000. Over 20 years, and we're going to have to be doing it every year for 20 years, that's $1 million. Are you folks willing to fork out $1 million over 20 years of looking at wellheads? I mean, this is expensive, folks. it doesn't even test the meter. It doesn't do anything to do a meter test. My proposal would be, we already have a meter testing program in place. We have an ordinance that says we can test the meter. What we ought to do is require that meter tester supply us with some documentation of what he's actually tested. We want a photograph of the meter. We want a photograph of the actual plumbing. Maybe we ought to just take our current system that the public, for the most part, is bought into, and that is to get their wells tested. The cities, as I understand it, do it on an annual basis. We've moved it to a 3-year basis. So we already have a protocol in place, and maybe we ought to figure out a way to not have two folks from the GMA, one mandated, they're paying $300 for, and the other one we're paying for, which becomes an ongoing expense. I have a problem with that. So I have a problem of getting access. I have a problem with money. I recognize it's a concept, but even at the concept level, if I extend it out, what happens if we go out and we look at the plumbing based on where the meter is? And when we actually look at it, we realize it's bad plumbing. What do we do at that point? Do we say, okay, that's bad plumbing, and look the other way? Or do we send that well operator a letter saying, by the way, our inspection of your well says that you're not in tolerance of how to properly install a meter. We need you to completely replumb it. Oh, by the way, the cost of doing that when you bring the welder out and everybody else out in the middle of your irrigation sequence is about $4,000. Are we in fact setting up a code enforcement kind of guy? And that's what code enforcement. So when code enforcement comes knocking on your door and says, hey, I'd just like to come in and visit your backyard, the whole world is wide open to them, and maybe you do not want him there. So I've got concerns about the concept, even at the concept level. And I think that maybe the solution to this problem is that we might, first of all, decide if we want to go down the concept road, and if we do, I would suggest that we form the group, the similar group that we did when we did the well meter testing. It could be the same group, I don't know, or a different group. And we vet this thing out. How are we going to make sure we get access? Under what authority do we have the right to demand access? Do we even have that authority? And if we don't, and 55% of the people tell us, go pack sand, and we're paying some agency or some guy or some company $90,000, and they sit at a phone all day long and get rejects. That's a license to steal. Yep, got another reject. That's good. Day's work done. Man, sign me up for that. Dave, in his part-time of running valves at PV, would be doing that for us.
Mr. Chairman, many operators have been allowed to use Edison as their tester, and I don't think there's going to be any way in the world we can induce Edison to accompany their tester with a cameraman or a camera or even the thought of it. So that puts about half of the ag group, at least, probably not compliant.
You just raised another problem then.
Yeah, and the other half is, if you remember when I first was talking with you with regard to this, I really do believe that the single way, obviously done in Santa Clara County where they have an ordinance, is somehow to have partnered with the public health who have some of the rights.
Yes.
That you're alluding to, because it's a well that affects. I mean, it's a problem that affects not just the GMA, but everything.
Mike, explain to them what your concern is on public health. You've told me about it, but they don't understand.
Well, the public health aspects, and I was surprised when I first came on this agency, was that there is no really follow-up once a well's in the ground. You can put a sewer plant right next to the well, and there's nobody going to notice it. And that is, you're not supposed to have anything within 100 feet of a well, which is an animal holding facility or a manure pile or any such thing. But there is no way, no one is bothering to notice it, nor is there an enforcement way to control it if those are done after the well is drilled. And it seems to me that's a gigantic absence in logic. The County of Santa Clara has a policy, but there seems to be some problem with us being able to do it here, perhaps on the funding side from public health, because public health has to be an integral part of that.
Well, that would be the other side of what Rick has to manage, and the staff, and that's a small staff too. We are aware of the Santa Clara and their wellhead protection program.
Yeah.
They have 4 to 5 people to just administer that portion of the program. So
Very
just
expensive.
a comparative, yes.
They're getting a lot of things done that we don't even have vision of.
Definitely a valuable program.
You know, I'm not sure how much one dead person is, but if we ultimately have one, we'll wish we may have spent the money.
This is a concept level proposal. The next step, two possible steps. You table it and you take it off the table, or you give it some life and move it a little bit further down the road. So the first question that I would ask the members, do you want to table the issue, or do you want to give it some life, and then we'll define what kind of life you want to give it. What's the next step? So let me ask across the table. What do you want to do, Charlotte?
Well, let me take one step back.
Okay.
There are a lot of issues we spend a lot of time on, such as this one, and I don't know, 6 months ago or a year ago or sometime, I've lost track of time. We discussed this before, and we discussed one specific way of doing it, and Director Kelly kind of came unglued, and that was tabled, and now we've got this. And so today you've kind of come unglued. And maybe what we need to do with things like this that some of us may consider radical and other people may consider just as something that needs to be done is have a general topic of discussion with several different options instead of just bringing one proposal and here's another proposal. And we might be able to move forward without having this at one meeting and 6 months later and 6 months later and we've gone a year and a half down the road with nothing having been done. We could hash it out and get a discussion at one point. Frankly, I was in favor of the automatic meter reading things. I'd be in favor of this too. I think whatever we're going to do is going to cost some money. Whether it costs now or later or a little bit every year, it's going to cost some money. We're not going to get these things verified for free. So I don't know how much that money should be. This seemed like a reasonable cost to me. I don't know about the access, but if this is a concept piece that we're approving or telling them to bring back more information on or a specific plan on, I guess they'd have to tell us how we're going to gain access and how much that particular thing would cost and have people comment on it. So I can support either way. I just think that sometimes when there are new ideas, maybe we need various alternatives to discuss instead of keep sending them back for another alternative to be developed and brought back. You know, things that aren't fully developed at the beginning.
Dave, what do you want to do?
I was wholeheartedly against the AMR, as I thought it was a technical situation that was going to cause us a lot of headache and a lot of incredible expense. A lot of what the agency has trouble with, particularly in-house, is trying to figure out from maps and from GIS imagery and other documentation what's going on with this well. When you could have sent a guy out and spent an hour and seen for yourself, I think that's a much more cost-effective way. I think the cost listed here seems to be excessive. $113 an hour seems to be a bit much to me. I agree with Robert. I think there are some savings to be had here. Maybe we don't perhaps need to see every single meter. Maybe we need to see the meters that we suspect are there or we don't know are there. That reduces that number greatly. You brought up a good issue about setting up a code enforcement agency. I agree with you. I don't think we want to be that agency. But at the same time, we've decided that we want everyone to have meters, and we want them to have them in such a way, and we want them to be tested. Then we're going to have to enforce it. So I don't see how we cannot enforce. So I think I support the boots on the ground as the most cost-effective, practical solution to arriving at some of these problems. And particularly, it's a person also that can can research whether there actually is a well there or whether it's been destroyed or these kinds of situations. I do think we need to have the question of access answered.
Mike?
Well, I support the concept of having somebody go and look and figuring out how to do it. I think we have a good exec officer, and he could perhaps communicate with Sheriff Dean, and we can figure out how to get access if we have to. I remind us, so there was a case maybe 10 years ago or so where we had an animal control officer in Ojai go in a backyard, and I think he came out, I don't know if he actually got shot, but he was getting close. And it's been just long enough I can't remember it. So the potential is there and has happened here in this county. So anyway, don't go through a lock gate, maybe.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is no one is in favor, well, Charlotte said she'll go either way, but I'm hearing no one's in favor of tabling this issue. It needs to be run up the flagpole a little bit further before we get to that point. Okay, so now the question is, how do we run it up the flagpole? We got a couple of options. We can ask staff to give us 3 different concepts of how we'd retain this individual. That'd be one. Or, it becomes either a staff function on how we do the next step, or do we somehow reconstitute the group similar to what we did for the meter ordinance to begin with, and let them sort out some of these, what I think are very practical questions, and that is access. I think that's probably the biggest dilemma we have right now, is access and making contact with these people and in somehow giving them a rational argument that we should be allowed to do this when I'm not sure we actually have passed any authority that gives us to do that. So the question is, do we want to send it to another cut with staff, or do we want to assign it to some kind of committee?
If I could suggest, maybe we don't need to go to take that long with it. We essentially have one question that I think all want to have answered, is of access. I think staff could research that for us and give us an answer on what are the ramifications of access. And then perhaps staff could survey Mr. Aranio and perhaps Dave Souza about concepts for the RFP. What are reasonable cost estimates that they can imagine someone charging to have an employee, an outside company charging to have an employee do this work.
John Dickinson from United is here. Is that something you guys, the 3 of you, could kind of give some thought to?
Sure, happy
to. Okay.
Maybe the 3 of those fellows could be surveyed, and then staff could come back to us with a refined cost concept and maybe some answers to some of the questions.
We'll be back to your board with any sort of contract for this, so you'll be able to see the costs at that time. This 113, I mean, it's a red herring, to use Rob's term. It was just a number that we wanted to give you that was concerned. We're not trying to hire somebody for 100. So, but we'll come back with the proposal or the statement of work and the budget, and your board will have a chance to review it at that time.
One of the things I will throw out to you, we've had success at United. We've hired grad students from UCSB that are in geology and some of these other areas. It looks great on their resume. And there could be some grad student up at UCSB that, and you basically set up a 6-month or a 3-month program, and you target even a smaller sampling, and let's see how successful we are. And here you got a college kid with a camera and a car, and he's making college money, but he's knowledgeable. I mean, we've done that at United, so that may also be, it may be that as part of the pilot program, you actually scale it down even smaller using a graduate student.
It might be. The suggestion for your board is that Rick did not get through his presentation, and there may be some other things that your board, we thought there might be other things your board would consider this person doing. So what we would like to do, I propose to do, is present it to you during the budget session as part of the overall budget study, because it is a priority work item that you've mentioned, and that way we'll get a better feel for what it is you want this person to do, and then we can develop a proposal based on that.
Okay, let's do that. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted one clarification. I didn't for a minute mean that on this thing at this point in time we needed alternatives. I was saying, when it first came to us, I think
Okay,
it would have been good to have
All right.
had
You okay with it?
alternatives
You okay with
and
this?
hash it out then.
Charlotte, you okay with the direction we're taking now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's do that. All right, anybody else comments on this real quick? We've handed back to staff for the next meeting. Okay, let's go to, thank you. What's our last item we have to deal with?
Executive summary.
Where is my, oh, here we go. 5, 8, we've done our executive summary. Anybody have any questions? All right. Any other items that people want to talk about before we adjourn? Going one. Thank you. Going once. It's not today, so you're ahead of the game. Going once. Going twice. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, folks.